Hello and welcome back to our channel. Let's face it, Dog Soldiers not only snuck its way into cult status, but it kicked and screamed, shredding expectations like some lycanthrope at a full moon killing rampage. The 2002 werewolf-action-horror hybrid brought military grit, practical gore, and ferocious beasts onto the screen for its fans to howl in jubilation. This is no monster movie, this is the monster movie for those who like their werewolves with a side of shell casings. And today, we're going to delve into 15 absolutely bonkers behind-the-scenes facts that serve to prove that Dog Soldiers is not simply iconic, it is legendary. Expect blood, guts, and some truly mad filmmaking stories. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. A unique werewolf design. Let's start with something that sets Dog Soldiers apart immediately. Crazy werewolf design. The artists completely tossed away the idea of beefy, snout-faced lycanthropes with shaggy shoulders and WWE physiques. Neil Marshall's monsters went a whole different way. Their design departs from an understanding of brute strength to one of grace and movement. Tall, lean, and disturbingly human, these werewolves stand upright, towering and imposing, and eerily graceful. They are the ballerinas in monster movies, and it works. Marshall worked with special effects designer Bob Keane, known for his work on Hellraiser and Event Horizon, in conceptualizing creatures that married brute savagery with humanoid intelligence. A weird combination, uncanny in the way that these werewolves are graceful, intelligent, and bursting with violent intent. In fact, they almost seem to hunt for sport, and not only for food. They stood out because of their height and slimness, but it was the inheritance of that very strangeness of familiarity that made them unforgettable. They're simply born from nightmares instead of myths. Long limbs, exaggerated fingers, and almost anatomical precision. They would really belong to some cursed painting tucked away in some filthy old corner in a gothic manor. These beings seem real, even when you know they are only practical suits. This brave choice of design does far more than create stunning visuals. It feeds into the film's very tension. The werewolves are fast, they are predatory, and the most genius part, they are credible. This is one of the enormous reasons why fans still consider Dog Soldiers one of the greats in werewolf films. These beasts do not just bump in the night, they crash through the windows, tear down doors, and haunt your dreams long after the credits roll. Dancers in costumes. This is one bizarre fact bordering on freaky. Those werewolves that could cause sleepless nights, they were danced into being. For real. Neil Marshall went up against casting stuntmen or workout junkies for the towering monster suits. He cast professional dancers, moving with grace and body control. Dancers are trained to bring a story through motion, and Marshall needed the werewolves to feel almost surreal in the way that they stalked and attacked. He wanted anything but lumbering brutes. He wanted sleek predators that would prowl, twist, and spring. And the results are haunting. The werewolves glide. They're quick, accurate, and their fluidity is unnerving. Think demonically possessed Cirque du Soleil, if the performers had claws and a vested interest in plenty of face stakes. This choice of casting carried with it the added bonus of diminishing suit restrictions. Practical effects are heavy and awkward things, but dancers have the stamina and the flexibility to give life to costumes that might come off as stiff or hokey. Hiding behind snarling masks and fur-covered limbs was a performer trained to make every movement earn its keep. From the moment they would hold boiling tension with an arched posture, you could feel the threat in their stance, the speed in their stride, and the menace in their maneuver. It's a nuance that makes all the difference. We've seen a fair bit of movie monsters, but these ones have intention in their movement, and that sits with your brain whether you appreciate it or not. That's part of what allows the scares in Dog Soldiers to stick. The monsters are not simply scary, they move like nightmares. Practical effects over CGI. In the era where CGI started becoming the norm in horror, Dog Soldiers stood its ground and declared, "No, we are going practical." And thank the horror gods for that. Neil Marshall and his team did go with prosthetics, animatronics, and blood the old-fashioned way, and what went on was exhilarating, gritty, and satisfying. Bob Keane and his team designed suits to look great on a moving body, along with all that action and blood, and they do. The bites, the slashes, the blood, and the gore, everything is shot in your face immersive, which really can't be recreated in sterile computer generation. Because of this dedication to practical work, the actors got to interact with the monsters on set, which increased the performance's credibility. Sean Pertwee screaming in sheer terror? He was actually screaming at this towering werewolf puppet, grinning and sneering at him. No amount of acting could replace that kind of genuine feeling. This isn't just style though, it makes a statement. Dog Soldiers had that early 1980s horror vibe greatness, where resolve and craft ruled. It's a big reason that the movie is still alive and relevant even decades later. Practical effects may nearly kill you, but when well done, pure gold for horror. No transformation scenes. This is one of Dog Soldier's bold strokes. There is no lycanthrope transformation. It's the zip in the genre that's almost predestined with that sequence as a rite of passage. Pretty gutsy choice, but you know what? This really worked. Neil Marshall knew that sometimes less can be more. Why spend time and money on a montage sequence of a transformation? It's all about what happens afterward. The next moment, you've got a snarling, towering beast. The transformation happens off-screen, but your imagination readily fills in the rest. This decision was made as much for budgetary reasons as for other considerations. Turning a human being into a wholly believable werewolf is no small effort, particularly when needing practical effects. They eat up lots of time and resources. But Marshall knew that sometimes horror works best behind closed doors. It's the roughened human screams, the sickly, poignant sound of bones being shifted into new forms, and the stomach-turning silence that follows. That's when real suspense hits. It's also a cleverly subverted expectation. All horror fans bear the hypothetical burden of some dramatic mid-transformation shot. Hair sprouting, jaws cracking, limbs twisting. That is the very thing Dog Soldier denies, thereby directing attention to all the mayhem that follows the monster's arrival. Keeps the pacing tight, and the terror remains uninterrupted. That stylistic choice meshes efficiency with the film's entire tone. Dog Soldiers is not a dark, poetic werewolf tale, it's a fast-paced, blood-slick survival horror film. We don't need to know how the werewolves transform, we just need to know that they are here, and they're going to ruin your night. Military training for actors. The other great thing about Dog Soldiers is that the soldiers feel so authentic. They move like real gymnasts, talk in shorthand, and function as a unit. And it's not just evocative acting, it is training. Marshall put the main cast through the ring of real-life military training before filming started. He taught them how to shoot weapons, talk under stress, and portray a soldier's action. This is more than about putting on a face. It's more about the instinct and body language of the actors so that the performance is believable. And gosh, does it work. From the first scene, you believe these guys have served together. There's camaraderie, a banter style of relating with each other, and a palpable sense of chain of command and team dynamics. So when the werewolves start ripping through their ranks, it hits harder. You don't just watch characters die, but rather brothers fall. That realism just adds a whole nother layer of grit to the entire movie. It's not merely man versus monster, it is trained professionals trying to survive against something for which they cannot be trained. That's the contrast that gives Dog Soldiers its edge. The military vibe moves the film comfortably onto an action horror stage. The shootouts, the tactics, the explosive finale, it all feels earned because these guys behave like actual soldiers. This was another smart move by Marshall, making what could, in any other scenario, feel generic horror fodder into something way more intense and memorable. Filmed in Luxembourg. One great surprise about Dog Soldiers is that, although set off in a far-off and wild place in the Scottish Highlands, the film was in fact shot in tiny Luxembourg. The mist-covered woods, haunted glens, and shadowy atmospherics of the film owe it all to Luxembourg's scenic terrain. Director Neil Marshall and his production team made this decision due to budget constraints. Filming in Scotland would have been much more expensive and logistically difficult. To the audience, the illusion is seamless. Very few would guess that those chilling wilderness shots were hundreds of miles away from their intended setting. Yet again, we see Dog Soldiers punching well above its weight class when it comes to finances. The other advantage to shoot in Luxembourg was practicality. At that time, the country gave super-friendly financial incentives for filmmakers, which attracted a deluge of lesser-budget productions trying to maximize their dollar. This politically astute decision helped direct more of the already limited budget into the crucial area of effects, props, and and set pieces worthy of the movie's greatness. Such a testimony would draw from the resourcefulness of the crew and Neil Marshall's vision, highlighting that the location change had no adverse impact on the mood and integrity of the entire piece. Shooting in sequence. Fewer and fewer films today are actually shot in chronological order. Most filmmakers save time and money by shooting out of sequence according to cast availability, location scheduling, and so on. Dog Soldiers kicked out all the rules. Shooting from day one through to the last frame had been, according to Neil Marshall, a unique consideration that proved, in retrospect, to be a great one. Actors felt the growing tension and fear in real time when producing proceeded in the order of story events. As the characters on screen fell further into chaos, fear, and desperation, so did the performers themselves. The raw emotional development is something you can sense on the screen. The gradual erosion of camaraderie, the nervous energy building, and the settling of each character under mounting terror felt authentic because these were the actors' own real-life experiences by day. Marshall's ruling was consequential, not just for the performers. The crew found an organic rhythm to their shooting, with props and sets falling apart as the story universe and characters fell apart psychologically. Blood splatters carried forward while bullet holes kept accumulating, aiding continuity and creating believable visual effects. This approach had stamped on the movie a peculiar feel of grittiness and realism. This is one of those making decisions that an average viewer would hardly ever recognize, but they would sure matter. Dog Soldiers used its chronology in the making of the film to show off an aura of rawness and immersion that would surpass many other creature features. The low budget, high impact. Let's talk numbers. Dog Soldiers was made on a meager budget of £2 million, about $3 million at the time, which is practically nothing in the film business. By contrast, a little less than that is spent on just about any horror Hollywood flick that includes the ones from independent studios. Yet Dog Soldiers gave no impression of a shoddy production. Instead, it felt gritty, slick, and jam-packed with action and gore. Just how did Neil Marshall and his crew work this kind of magic? It lies behind ingenious filmmaking and resourceful decision-making. First off, they kept the action mostly contained. The major action of the piece takes place in a single location, deep forest land, and an isolated farmhouse, cutting down travel and setup costs massively. Second, they put value in practical pyrotechnics rather than the abstract-style CGI. Right from the werewolf suits to bloody stunts, everything we saw on screen was based on practical materiality. Aside from the latter option being an economic one, it equally helped in establishing the horror feel and tactile sense even more. The rest, as they say, is history. Dog Soldiers had a ball with its audience, a story of wild energy and enthusiasm celebrated by reviewers, a kindred spirit to horror buff communities with a return style, and so the now established cult classic begins. It's gone on to be considered by most as one of the greatest werewolf films that taught producers all the tricks on a minuscule budget and with oodles of creativity. That template is one that production companies aspire to even today. Double roll of corpses. Necessity is the mother of invention, and in the case of Dog Soldiers, that meant more than just reusing actors. In a fun twist of horror history, some of the mangled corpses seen hanging in the basement scenes weren't created specifically for Dog Soldiers at all. They were actually leftover props from Event Horizon from 1997, the cult sci-fi horror film directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. That connection gets even cooler when you realize Sean Pertwee starred in both films. In Event Horizon, he played Smith, one of the unlucky crew members aboard the haunted spaceship. Years later, when shooting Dog Soldiers, the filmmakers repurposed several disturbingly detailed body props originally used to depict the tortured victims of the Event Horizon's hellish voyage. The corpses in Dog Soldiers are featured in the eerie basement sequence where the soldier Cooper discovers the grim bounty of previous victims. The camera pauses just long enough to give the viewer a view of the dangling bloodied limbs and grotesquely twisted torsos. It's a brief moment, but incredibly impactful in creating dread, and all the more chilling considering that these bodies had previously been on screen. Recycling movie props is an effective way to save costs and recycle some subtle Easter eggs for the horror fans. Such behind-the-scenes decisions add value to their very legacy. By mixing classical effects with some nifty production tricks, Dog Soldiers keeps on proving that a little imagination can really go a long way toward creating lasting horror. paying tribute to classic films. Dog Soldiers is a fine horror movie, but also partly a gesture of homage to the genre. Marshall is a big fan of horror, action, and sci-fi, and he peppered his film with homages to the many classics that had inspired him. Viewing Dog Soldiers is thus an Easter egg hunt for a genre geek, with perhaps several Easter eggs in every frame. The frantic pacing and the mayhem inside a blood-splattered cabin were the payoff of Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. The camaraderie among the soldiers and the roaring terror took quite overt inspiration from James Cameron's Aliens. The werewolf mythology borrows bits and pieces from An American Werewolf in London and The Howling, confidently enough never to feel derivative. Even the names and the dialogue are resplendent with tributes. Cooper almost certainly references one of Kyle Reese's allies in Aliens, whereas the line, "There is no spoon," winks at The Matrix. These tributes are never shoved in your face. They are interwoven so tightly into the very fabric of the film that they work to enrich the viewing experience for those in the know. Marshall drafted it so that he could pick the very best bits of the films he loved and mash them in with something new. Instead of role modeling, he threw a party. And it's hard not to be swept along with that energy. Dog Soldiers is great because it honors its predecessors while very much carving its own path. That balance between reverence and invention, that's what makes Dog Soldiers unique. Not just as the best werewolf film, but as a solid entry in the pantheon of horror films. For those of the genre, it's a film that pays dividends on many rewatches and deep studies. With every watch, you'll find something new, and that's the very charm that keeps it alive. Accident on Set with Sean Pertwee. The most gruesome and goriest thing to ever take place in Dog Soldiers must have been Sergeant Harry G. Wells, played by Sean Pertwee, yelling in pain while stuffing his intestines back into his abdomen after being savagely slashed by werewolves. However, that was dark humor taken to the extreme, involving much more than anyone could have bargained for behind the scenes. For that very shot, Pertwee went through a strange ritual of drinking loads of alcohol in an attempt to put himself into the mindset of an injured, rapidly deranged soldier. In the same take, Kevin McKidd, playing the character Cooper, was supposed to deliver a staged punch to the face of Pertwee, just as he was supergluing his open stomach. It did not go quite to plan. McKidd mistimed his punch, exchanging an all-time full-on hit against Pertwee's face, resulting in a broken nose. Up until that moment of real injury, Pertwee had been, in his words, wobbly from booze and the madness of the scene, and never really realized he had been hurt. Later, he thought back to that moment, looking around to see with bafflement the crew members worried about him, only to realize that the blood down his face was not FX blood, it was his own blood. A frightful instance illustrating how far both cast and crew were willing to go to anchor such a fantastical story in gritty realism. Being the true professional that he was, Pertwee laughed it off and went on with the scene. He confessed then at the premiere that he could almost never remember that moment of filming. Pertwee would, much later, say with a chuckle that he would never recommend mixing real alcohol with very physical scenes, but added that the whole thing had been shot in a safe, very supportive atmosphere. That helps with the very last touch of unintended, but certainly welcome, verisimilitude to the whole acting job, and is now the gravitas that goes with the making lore of Dog Soldiers, a testimony to the blood and sweat, and yes, even blood and torn bodies that came together to produce something very memorable. The next time you see Sergeant Wells reeling in pain, keep in mind that it was, at least partially, very, very real. Innovation in set designs. One of the unsung heroes of Dog Soldiers is, of course, the remarkable set design. It's somewhat hard to believe, but ironically, the film evokes an impression of an ancient Scottish farmhouse, weather-beaten and grimy. Most of those scenes were captured in sound stages, and for that, the project had to be built entirely from scratch, including the designing of the farmhouse by the production team with pure genius and beauty. The designers made the set with removable walls so that they could shoot from dynamic angles during tight, claustrophobic action, but it was especially effective because they went all in. Every surface was treated to haphazardly applied aging, layers of filth, and all kinds of damage to sell the illusion of a once-neglected home turned into a battlefield. The end result is a space that literally feels alive and drenched in the horror of something hanging heavy from the rafters. Extra measures were taken to make the soot and grime as real as possible, as well as the destruction of the furniture. These things actually make Dog Soldiers very different from other cheap movies. Instead of a new entity, the creative decision to birth a creaking, shadowy death trap infused the film with suspense at each twist. Marshall and crew showed that complex locations are not needed to instill fear. All your characters need are a few walls, some locked doors, and a threat just beyond the door to turn it into horror gold. Use of miniatures for explosions. Dog Soldiers used the old-school way of exploding at its climax, far better than CGI, which is nowadays the norm. The final breath-exploding culmination to the film is neither with computer-generated images nor any enormous builds. It was all miniatures. Yes, the fireball exploding toward the film's release was a painstakingly crafted little model that was blown up and filmed with the kind of precision that only practical effects can provide. The visual impact? Stunning. The cost? A pittance in comparison to a full-scale explosion. Using miniatures is a well-established technique in the genre. The team executed it with brilliance. Together with skilled editing and lighting magic, a simple smoke effect finishes the illusion that there's been massive destruction without putting anyone's life in danger or taking away from the film's budget. Besides, it gives the film a quality of touch and grit which CGI lacks most of the time. When something explodes in Dog Soldiers, the explosion feels real, because, in its own way, it is. Another classic case of the film getting more out of less and doing it damn well. Avoidance of werewolf tropes. Neil Marshall had a cool and completely different take on the werewolves in Dog Soldiers. Instead of being steeped in straw about curses and silver bullets and sad transformations, he decided to strip all that away and make his werewolves just pure, unrepentant predators. Forget boring, moody full moons or the tortured soul thing. These beasts have no interest in poetic backstories or gothic origins. They simply show up for one reason: to hunt and kill. And that makes them even scarier. Marshall wanted to make a werewolf film that felt more like aliens with fur, and boy, did he pull that off. The creatures are not weighted down by exposition or lore. Their motives are primal, their presence terrifying. The rules even are vaguely defined. Sure, silver might be a consideration, but it's never just the main focus. What really is the focus is survival, and that focus keeps the tension razor sharp. This alternative exposition is what makes Dog Soldiers feel urgent and unpredictable. You're not primed for a full moon. You don't hope for someone to find a silver bullet. You're just hoping that someone can survive the next 5 minutes. It's this minimal approach that gives the film an edge in an overcrowded genre, ensuring the film keeps you wrapped with fast and furious scares. Enduring legacy. Even 20 years later, Dog Soldiers has buried its fangs deep into ever-willing horror fans, and not just making time, howling all the way into the legends of cult horror. There are midnight screenings, fan theories, retrospectives, and special edition releases that keep it alive and snarling in the horror community. Why does it stand the test of time, though? The right balance of relentless pacing, strong characters, unhinged creature design, and a hard-driving, pounding tone that never lets up. That's what. It's not trying to win awards, it's trying to rock you off your feet and give you a really big, knowing grin while doing it. Neil Marshall's debut was a love letter to the genre, one laden with practical effects, real tension, and an unabashed love for monster mayhem. And horror fans noticed. Today, Dog Soldiers stands taller than any before it in the pantheon of werewolf films. Marvelous verdict. So there you have it. 15 crazy facts proving that Dog Soldiers is anything but just another horror film. It is a labor of love. It is a marvel of practical effects. It's a genre-defying beast that refuses to fade into the night. Scrappy, clever, blood-soaked, and charming. Proof that passion and creativity always outlive fleeting trends and big budgets. Marshall and his motley crew took budget restrictions and transformed them into a goldmine of creativity, presenting to us a werewolf movie with teeth and heart. If you haven't seen it in a while, it's time to trek back into the woods with silver just in case. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.